Congratulations, Mets. For the second time this season, you have gone 1-10 in an 11 game stretch. July 28th to now, you've only won one game. Who knows how long this stretch is going to continue? This is after, from June 13th to 24th, the Mets had a very similar stretch. I don't think a team in MLB has ever gone 1-10 over an 11 game stretch twice and still made the playoffs. It's very tough to do, in particular, because, in the process of going 1-10, you put yourself 9 games under 500 to do it twice. You're putting yourself 18 games under 500. And since you figure you need to finish the season at like 12 games over 500 usually to make the playoffs, even with the expanded format, you basically got to go like 30 over 500 the rest of the season to even have a shot. You basically, for the rest of the season, have to go like 85 and 55 to make the playoffs. The Mets' issues are much deeper than that. After they won 2 games against the Braves to end their skid, they then lost 4 in a row, having a worst series in franchise history to the Pirates. July, they have a 14-6 stretch, including a 7-game winning streak, where they still face issues such as this, such as this 3-6 skid in July, around the time of the All-Star break. And now they're back into a tailspin. They're 18-30 since since June 13th. The third worst team in the MLB. Only the Nationals and Rockies are worse. I actually want to show you something about this. And before I get any deeper into this, there's some things on the SNY Mets Twitter that I want to show you that really just show how bad they've been. The Mets and Yankees had 2 of the first 4 worst MLB records since June 13th, and this is before the Mets lost tonight and the Yankees won. So the Yankees are now 20-30. So the Mets are now in sole possession of third worst, having gone a feeble 18-30. Now, the Rockies also lost yesterday, got walked off by the Diamondbacks. So it's not like the Mets all of a sudden jumped into a tie for the Rockies for second place. Nats are still the worst, Rockies are still the second worst, but the Mets are in third place. And because the Yankees managed to get a win today, because the Yankees managed to get a win today, now the Mets are in sole possession of third place. Notable teams that have been better than the Mets, and I'm not even including the Miami Marlins because they are genuinely a good team now, and they have a real shot to make the playoffs. They've actually been like a very hot team for a while, so I'm not even talking about them. Notable teams that have played poorly, but who still have better records than the Mets. In that time, you have the Chicago White Sox, Pittsburgh Pirates. Everyone knows how much the Braves are struggling this year, yet they're better than the Mets during this span. The Athletics are better than the Mets during this span. So there's a lot of notably bad teams that have been better than the Mets during this span. And I mean, the Mets are so bad over the stretch that wait. And the Mets are so bad over the stretch that they aren't even on the scale. Like they're like, this list only gives you the first 25 teams. It doesn't even tell you where the worst ones are. And again, the Marlins have actually genuinely been the 4th best team in baseball since that time, so I didn't even count them because they're genuinely a good team. But like the Athletics, who've actually been better than I thought, they're 26 and 23, and in 14th, Orioles, another bad team at 26 and 24. Pirates, to their credit, they're below 500, but they're 23 and 25. So they are better than some teams like the Tigers that everyone knows are a good team this year. But you have the Braves at 21 and 29. They're still better. The you know, like I mentioned, Yankees are now only sixth worst as they're 20 and 30. If you go to MLB worst record since June 13th on StatMoose, then the White Sox, they're 19 and 29. And so are the Twins. And so are the Giants. The Mets could have been in that position. But the reality is that now they're in standalone for third place. And there's a lot of notable teams that are a lot better than the Mets during a stretch. They really are free falling. The Mets have also set a record since 1901, 51 straight games without two different starting pitchers recording a start of at least 6 innings. The only pitcher to do so since June 7th was David Peterson. You're not going to win too many games when you don't let your pitchers go for quality starts. And there's a lot of things that we could talk about as to why the Mets have been sucking recently, but I mean the reality is that if you look at something like Fangraphs, you could see the Mets division odds have really plunged, and the Mets wild card odds have Mets wild card odds have also plunged. For the first time this year, maybe not this year, but in a while, the Yankees have better odds than the Mets. If you look at just making the playoffs, the Mets had their lowest odds all year after they lost opening day on March 27th. Their playoff odds stood at 58.8% after that point. Since then, they rebounded, and at the end of April, had almost a 90% chance to make the playoffs. That's pretty good for really early on in the season. They had some struggles. It didn't look so great in late May as their playoff odds sunk to around 70%. June 12th, they had a 5.5 game lead in the division. They had 96.2% odds to make the playoffs. The record was 45 and 24, and then the tailspin starts. June 24th, their odds plunged to about 75% after that 1-10 stretch, but then they actually revived themselves, quite decently well after that point. They have 96.8% odds to make the playoffs on July 27th, so they basically recovered in that sense of they played sub 500 ball with a 17 and 20 record since June 13th when you include that whole stretch, but that's perfectly fine. 45 and 24, if you were to play 500 ball at that rate, you'd go 91 and 71 and make the playoffs. If you're sitting at 62 and 44 and you play 500 the rest of the way, then you're finishing off the year at 90 and 72. Not as good, but good enough to make the playoffs. The Mets were at a position where really, all they had to do was play 500 ball after they at one point plunged to, say, 48 and 38, where if you play 500 ball, you're only going 86 and 76, and it's likely not enough to make the postseason. However, they've now fallen off, the deep end since then with 82.1% odds. They actually fell to 81.5% yesterday. I don't know why today all of a sudden they've shot up, but you figure that in theory the Mets have good odds to make the playoffs. But the reality, unfortunately, is a lot less kind. Fangraphs was a team where even when the Braves, had their awful, pitiful, embarrassing start to the season, the Braves were still looking at, over 60% odds to make the postseason. It wasn't really until the start of June where the Braves' odds to make the playoffs really began to dwindle. Now they're basically diddly squat. And a team like the Marlins, which have been hot for a while, you know, had low odds, had pretty much no odds to make the playoffs, or very little odds to make the playoffs until now, when all of a sudden now they finally seem to have slight chance, but seem to have something in them. But as for the winning the division crowd, the Mets opened the season with only 15% odds, mainly because everyone assumed that the Braves would not have the kind of season that they've had. Now they're back to 14.5% after last night, 14.2%. So again, don't know why it shot back up. Their lowest odds were 13.7% after they lost opening day, but the Mets pretty much have their worst odds to win a division, ever since opening day, when they were 0-1 to start the year. There were points where the Mets only had a 24.4% chance to win a division on May 23rd. Things really weren't looking good. They were 2.5 back in the division, and the Braves were also still a factor at that point before they just completely fell off the face of the earth. So they weren't very good either. Then all of a sudden, the Mets have 3 and 4 odds to win a division on June 12th. And then the tailspin means that by mid-June the Mets playoff odds division odds are now worse than the Phillies, drops to the upper 30s, but then they get back above 50% on in July, just to fall off the face of the earth after that point. August 2nd, they retake the division probably one final time, and this is what this uptick represents, and since then, it's been complete and utter freefall, as the Mets keep losing, and not only that, but the Philadelphia Phillies keep on winning. So the Mets keep losing, and the Philadelphia Phillies keep winning. No other team is really a serious factor at this point, and soon the Mets will fall off the face of the earth either. In terms of expected wins, if the Mets continue at this pace, they're going to look at, the Fangraphs estimates the Mets to have 88 wins. Now, if you have 63 over 63 plus 54, and then you multiply that by 162, you get to 87 wins. So the Mets are pacing for only 87 wins, which is worse than last year. They're only pacing for 87 and 75. Fangraphs does give them expected win ratio of 88, which makes sense. Makes sense. They start the year on pace to win 86. That was with their earlier projections. There were points where the Mets, were projected to win 94 games. They were actually at one point on pace for 106 wins, but that's a little bit ridiculous, and I think everyone knew that the Mets would fall off. I just don't think anyone thought they'd fall off this dramatically. At the end of their tailspin in June, they were pacing for 89 wins, or not pacing, but expected to win 89 games. Then it goes back up to 92, just for it to go down to 88. So the Phillies are about the strongest they've ever been this season, and that's in part because now the Mets are pretty much out of division title contention, and the Mets odds are pretty low, but not as low as you think, considering that now the Reds control their own destiny to make the playoffs. Thankfully, the Miami Marlins have cooled off, so we don't have to worry about them too much, hopefully. And Fangraphs estimates the Marlins odds, expected win total to be 77%, the Braves 73%, and the Nationals 66%. To make the LDS, so for the Mets to not be a first-round exit, though, there is a 58% chance now that the Mets will be a first-round exit. Odds of the Mets making the LDS, 42%. That's low. They were, again, June 12th, 79.3% odds of the Mets making the LDS. And then 69% chance of the Mets making the LDS on July 27th. So, again, the this Mets season is weird because it seemingly has, two peaks of the season. Depending on which way you want to look at it, they have like two peaks of the season. But again, like now it looks like now it's over 50% chance the Mets either miss the playoffs or a first round exit. To win the LDS and make it back to the NLCS, the Mets never had odds that were greater than 50%. Now it's 20%. So there's an 80% chance now that the Mets have a worse year this year than they did last year. And again, not saying that those odds are supposed to be of making the NLCS are supposed to be very high. Philly's only 40% for a reason. The Mets odds peaked at 40.8% odds of making the NLCS. I'm not saying it's supposed to be very high. Making the NLCS is a very tough thing to do. However, it's something where the Mets odds after they made it last year should be higher than 20% this deep into the season. And, this is really one of the lowest moments the Mets have been in that regards. And in terms of winning the World Series, which is what the Mets are really all in on doing, their World Series odds have plunged to 5.4%. Somehow after yesterday, or 5.2%, I don't know how. The Mets opened the season with around 4% odds, but they've consistently, I'm never saying they've really been that great, peaking at around 10%. Again, odds to make the World Series shouldn't be that high, but it's unacceptable, really, in my eyes, for the Mets to have odds to make the World Series this low. Because remember, the Mets once had a 5.5 game lead in the division, 8.5 game lead in the final wild card spot. It's a 2.5 game lead on the final wild card spot, and they trail the division by 4.5. So the Phillies, who have started to take off for 50 days, starting on June 16th, Mets and Phillies were always within two of each other, and that's why the division had a lot of, seesawing back and forth. June 20th, the Phillies take the division. June 21st, the Mets take it back. June 22nd, the Phillies take it right back. June 26th, the Mets take it back. And then on June 27th, the Phillies take it back. July 12th, the Mets take it back. July 8th, the Mets take it back via tie. But then the July 9th game is called off. Phillies take it back. Mets take it back on the 12th. Phillies take it back on the 13th. The Mets, after having some struggles, after following the All-Star break, which, remember, play resumed on the 18th, after that, the Mets didn't retake the division until the next Wednesday on the 23rd. Then they, held on to it until the Phillies took it back August 1st. August 2nd, the Mets took it back. August 3rd, the Phillies took it back. At that point, everyone thought, okay, just give me a back-and-forth battle, just because the Phillies had lost a series to the Chicago White Sox. Little did we know, Phillies would start standing on business, and the Mets would look even worse, and now they're 4.5 game division deficit. They're now staring at their biggest division deficit all year. Am I going to say it's over for the Mets? Not quite yet. I mean, they could flip a switch. Last year, we all know the Mets fell to 4 games back of a playoff spot on August 28th. Their miracle run seemed all but over, and then the Mets had a fantastic September, which combined with a collapse by the D-backs allowed the Mets to go 13-16 over. Allowed the D-backs to go 13-16 over their final 29. Mets went 20-9, had the tiebreaker, and were able to get it. So, the Mets came back from a 4-game division deficit in 2024, and they didn't even jump the Braves to do it, which I think is the more impressive part of all of this. They jumped the D-backs, which they trailed by 7 games. So, again, I'm not saying it's over, but it's close. The Mets basically have to win 6 out of 7 against Philadelphia in their remaining matchups. But at this point, I'm not even going to say that the Phillies-Mets series is the biggest series of the year for the Mets. It's undoubtedly important, but at this point, the Mets have really lost control of the division. Phillies are playing the Reds too, and normally I'd say the Mets absolutely need to cheer against the Phillies. Mets need to cheer for the Phillies in this case. They need to cheer against the Cincinnati Reds. And Phillies fans who are hoping the Mets are missing the playoffs, they got to help the Mets out. The Mets' most important series of the year is probably the series against the Reds in early September. They're playing in Cincinnati too. If the Mets get swept in Cincinnati, even if both teams have the same record the rest of the way, the Reds will make the playoffs. So a 5-1 edge, and they'll be either tied or a game in front of the Mets. The Mets, who lost a series to the Reds at home, need to go into Cincinnati and somehow find a way to take 2 out of 3, which is going to be a very tall order for a team struggling this much. The only good news is, at least the Mets will have an off day on September 4th before the series, although off days have not been helping the Mets much at all recently. And who knows, maybe the Mets will fall so far back of the Reds by that point as they keep slumping. Reds are playing only 500 ball now too, but Mets are playing so much worse than that the Reds in the last 10, while playing mediocre, have still found a way to gain 4 games on the Mets. So the Mets, I think at some point the Mets wild card lead was at like 6.5. Now it's only 2.5, and I'll prove it. The Mets again. The Reds are 2.5 back. They're in the final wild card spot, and they're 2 back of the Padres for the 5th wild card spot. Not that it's really that important. It's just really pathetic when you realize that, where this team was. Like at one point, the Mets again, as I've said, they had it all. They had a 6-game lead over the Reds, and now they've completely blew that. And my second favorite team, the Cubs. The Mets aren't helping the Cubs either. Cubs aren't playing terrible ball either. They're not playing great, but it's really because the Brewers have really just dominated. And now they're dominating against the Mets. But the Mets have made a lot of critical mistakes in these last few days to lose games. And if you continue to give away games, you'll eventually give away the season and block the Mets out from making the playoffs. Because in the second part of the video, we're going to talk about what I would do to fix the team. The Mets play ball tonight and this afternoon, and ESPN is giving the Mets only about 3 and 8 odds to win the game, which is pretty bad for opening odds in MLB, where you'll never see one team have more than a 70% edge. The pitching matchup is Sean Manaea versus Quinn Priester. Manaea hasn't actually looked terrible this season, but Priester has been looking like a potential Cy Young candidate, even though his ERA is higher than normal when you look at his win-loss record. And the Brewers have not lost a game that he started in since late May. If I'm the Mets here, after seeing how bad some of your key performers have done recently, what I would seriously do, I'd bench some of the guys who've been playing poorly in a game that you're likely going to lose anyway. Why not just bench some of your key performers who are doing poorly? There's I know that you're giving away the game by doing this, but long term it's worth it. The Mets have no problem punting games as it is, so if Mendoza isn't a pussy and he actually puts his money to his mouth, he'd bench some key players. Now, I'm not even talking about Soto at this point. Soto hasn't looked perfect. No one is saying that he has. But Soto's played decently these last few games. So has Marte. We'll talk about that. Pete Alonso's been playing pretty decently too. Nimmo, Lindor are the two I'm really talking about, because they're key players. First of all, before we even get to how they've been batting, Lindor made a crucial error in the second inning. He made a fielding error. Now, this might turn into an infield single plus a fielding error, so one of the runs might be charged to Montas. Second one definitely wasn't. He got the ground ball, and Lindor made a horrible fielding error. In the 7th, this was also a play where Mauricio should have made, but it was not ruled an error. And of course, it led to a home run on an automatic ball with an automatic ball, which they should have flied out. So basically, since they couldn't put the inning away and they couldn't enter the eighth tied at 4, the Brewers put it away after the Mets, entered the bottom of the 7th with a 4-3 lead. So in terms of their gut punching losses, having to go ahead run on third twice, including the winning run against the Guardians, not being able to bring him in, that comeback into Giants having to go ahead run on second and not being able to bring him in. Having a 2-0 lead against the Guardians early on and blowing it, having a 2-0 lead against the Brewers and blowing it. This is the worst. The Mets finally had a lead after 6 innings. They finally had a lead after 6. And they blew it. Oh, and by the way, you might be wondering, because it doesn't mention the at-bats, how did Lindor respond right after that? Mets had runners on first and third. All he needed was a sac fly. All he needed was a sac fly to make it 4-2 and to give the Mets a comfortable lead. Lindor ground into a double play, which is the one thing you cannot do with 1 out and a runner on third base. You have to, at the very least, if you can't get the runner home, you have to be able to pass the torch on to the next batter, Soto. And especially because Soto wound up hitting a home run on the very next at-bat. This what makes what Lindor did worse. If Lindor simply struck out, let the batter let the torch pass to Soto. I mean, I granted that Brewers switched pitchers, so maybe this doesn't happen. But at the very least, you give Juan Soto a turn at the plate to do damage. And he did have a strikeout loaded with the bases loaded, looking with the bases loaded. The ESPN saying it's a strike. A lot of other people are saying it's a ball, and the same pitch was called a ball. So I'm not too upset about that. He kind of got hosed there. But Lindor is not looking good right now. And people said that he wanted to make him captain. He's trash. Lindor had a 629 OPS in July, 628 OPS in June. After he had a good start to the season, Lindor has not managed to piece together one good season on the Mets. In this game, he was forced at a pinch hit double after he likely broke his pinky toe. And we saw Lindor do worse. Lindor insisted on playing hero ball and playing on a broken toe and not going on the IL, which causes 2 problems, as you might have noticed, seeing as this means that both Lindor isn't healing and Lindor is also hurting the team, and at some point he'll probably wind up having to go on a 60-day IL and ending a season because of something that he easily could have gotten fixed but didn't, because he's too busy trying to make himself captain. He's been pitiful in a lot of these games, even though his August OPS is 720. He really has not looked good. It's mainly because he's had 2 doubles, one of which came in a blowout win. He had 1 home run in a blowout loss. To be fair, he had a double in this game that should have been a walk-off, but it wasn't because of Sarburg's stupid decision to hold Taylor at third. But, since then, he's been quiet since then. He's had 2 walks. But, in his last 15 at-bats, he's been hitless. In his last 15, he's on an 0-15 skid. Granted, at least he's drawing walks, which I guess is always good. But this has been a theme for Lindor where he's had some very piss-poor games. Very piss-poor games. Again, in this game, struck out 3 times and hit into an inning-ending double play on one of the times where he did put the ball in play. Francisco Lindor needs to be benched. He absolutely needs to be benched. His OPS is now a meager 740, which is pretty much right around where the league average is, and it started off in the mid 800s for a while. He's been playing awful baseball. You have to put your finger down on Lindor. You have to bench him. I don't think Lindor has actually been this ice cold since in a while. This is the lowest his OPS has been since April 19th. I'm pretty sure his OPS has never gotten lower than it has now since that point. And April 19th is still early when teams sort of have a right because they're figuring things out. Soto, I don't think that you should bench him, and benching him is a lot harder. He's actually showing up offensively. His OPS in August is 909. He had 760 in July, which is actually not that bad. 1.196 in June when the Mets stunk. Like, even in Soto's cold April, he was still 701. So it's not like Lindor. Soto is an average baseball player when he slumps. Whereas guys like Lindor, they can be really good, but when they go cold for months, you really feel it on the team. But Soto has hit a home run in his last 3 games. I know that was his first time hitting a home run since the 27th of July, but Soto, he's hit a home run in his last 3 games. Soto has not really been, ice cold. He's drawing his walks. He's hitting home runs. It's just that he's being let down by the team around him. At this point, I would not be surprised if Soto opts out after the 2029 season, because the Mets just are a dumpster fire. Marte. Marte is another guy that has also showed up. He hit home runs in back-to-back games in losing efforts. I get that Marte it has been bad in August and he's looked bad before then, but Marte's at least showing signs of life at the plate. He's 3 for his last 8. After all, even though before then, in his last 8, 9, 13 at bats, he went hitless. I could get into Pete Alonso, but I won't. He also hit a home run yesterday. What I'm really focusing on benching is Nimmo. Besides Lindor, Nimmo needs to be benched the most. In his last, 17 at bats at least, he is hitless. His OPS in August, 424. Brandon Nimmo was so bad in this blowout loss. He actually got pinch hit for Tyrone Taylor. He did get a meaningless single in the 8th inning, though. I'm so happy for him. He's looked like absolute doo-doo in this month. Really, Nimmo's stats are inflated from when he had this awesome game against the Nationals. 2 home runs, a double, 9 RBI. He went 4 for 6 in this game against the Nationals, which, by the way, the Mets are 3 games under 500 since this 19-5 win, where he tied the Mets record for most RBI in a game. Really, if not for that game, his stats would be so much lower. His OPS went up 104 points because of that game. So he's bad. He's not good, and his stats are also really inflated by a game. He actually had a decent July with an 805 OPS. He won 879 OPS in June when the Mets were really struggling. His worst month was actually April, as a matter of fact. But despite the game on the 28th, but he's looked pitiful in this month. Besides this 3-for-4 game against the Giants, where the Mets offense did really well and they had their one win during the stretch, he's been pretty bad. He had 1 hit in that blown 5-1 lead against the Padres. Besides that, he had 1 meaningless hit in this game. He's been bad too. Struck out 3 times yesterday. Struck out 2 times before that. So in his last 12 at bats. Not only has he been hitless, struck out 8 times. That's a 67% strikeout rate. Both Nimmo and Lindor need to be on the bench. And if the Mets aren't pussies and are actually a competent team, both of these key players would be benched. I know you're basically punting on the game by doing that, and you're basically giving up the series to Milwaukee, but sometimes you gotta make concessions. The Mets clearly have no problem punting games anyway. If you've watched the games and you've seen how many games the Mets have punted, you'll realize the Mets have no problem punting games as it is. And how many punt lineups they've had, how many games were started by Brandon Tidwell or Justin Hagenman, over the last little while. How many times there was a time where Zach Pop pitched in a real Major League Baseball game, and I'm not even kidding. You've had Davinsky pitching, you've had Carrillo pitching. The Mets have punted away so many games that that they really should have no problem punting away another one. And here's why I really don't think the Mets have a shot to make the playoffs. The Mets trade deadline was underwhelming, to say the least. They acquired 4 players at the deadline: Soto, Rogers, Helsley, and Mullins. And we're going to analyze how they perform. They re-signed Brooks Raleigh, but he was a Met before then. They re-signed him. Castillo has been pretty bad, and Garza has also not pitched very well. But we're gonna we'll see if we have time to focus on those, because I want to focus on deadline acquisitions first. But as far as they've been, the Mets started off in April hot, firing on all cylinders, 18-7 after they swept the Phillies at home. Since then, the Mets are an under 500 team. Since then, the Mets have won 44 games and lost 47. Actually, wait, no, they've won 45 games and lost 47, but still, they've been bad. Then, after that, 19-5 win against the Nationals, and they followed up by an 8-3 win against the D-backs, 21-9. Since then, 42 wins, 45 losses. So 3 under 500 since April 29th, 2 under 500 since April 23rd. Remember when the Mets, were in that tailspin of theirs? They were, net 3 games under for last game of April and May, when they fell all the way to 30-21 after they were 29-20. Remember that skid in May? Guess what? Mets have now played 500 balls since that point at the end of May. And again, after they were 45-24, pitiful and embarrassing, 18-30 baseball, 1-10 since they were 62-44 on July 27th in that win against the Giants. It's been bad how ugly these games have gotten for the Mets, and we're seeing this in real time. We're seeing this in real time, just how pathetic and embarrassing this team has become. Because the Mets are so bad that they've basically been 500 since this 5-4 win against the Phillies on April 21st. And if they lose, they'll now be worse than any point in May, whether it be when they were in terms of game of 500, whether it be when they were 22-13, when they were 23-14, 29-20, 30-21. They would be at their worst point in games above 500 since April 20th in their 7-4 win against the Cardinals that early in the season, if they were to lose today, which is highly likely. and their record would fall to 63-55. Let's just take a moment to appreciate just how pathetic the Mets have been. They're at home, 1-5 at home, which looking at home, it's been consistent. Home has been the Mets' happy place every single month. The Mets have had a winning record at home. August, I think, changes that. And notice how every single month they've either been 500 or worse on the road. That's staying the same. That part's staying constant, but their home record, that is not staying constant. Personally, to fix the team, and I've said this before, I think the Mets should have sold at the deadline. They should have sold. You had an off season where you didn't make any meaningful moves. The Jose Siri trade backfired as Siri got injured immediately, didn't play very well before then, and as we know, got injured immediately. And Eric Orze actually won a game against the Mets after he stunk on the Mets. Montas, I don't know why you get him this early with this good of a deal that early on when Montas has not played pretty good this year. You got Clay Holmes on a 3-year deal, which, again, I don't know why. And then you make him a starter. Like, what was he doing? Soto was obviously a very good, meaningful contract, but you probably overpaid for him, although he's proof they need a salary cap, and someone was overpaying for him. Canning, I get he got injured. That was unfortunate. He actually played pretty well before then. It was a very cheap deal. Manaea, unfortunate he got hurt, but that was probably a pretty good deal. Minter, again, unfortunate that he got hurt. And Austin Warren has actually been pretty good for the Mets. The Alonso deal was pretty good. But the offseason acquisitions were underwhelming. They didn't get a true Cy Young ace. And they didn't really... And in terms of the trade deadline acquisitions, Gregory Soto. Gregory Soto's actually been pretty decent for the Mets. But when it mattered most, he blew the game away. And this game was a huge reason as to why I think that that errors by pitchers should count towards the ERAs. It's because Cronenworth or Iglesias hit a ball to the pitcher, should have been out at second. Bogarts was safe on a throwing error. Tyler Rogers. He's had a hold. He's had 2 holds on the Mets so far. But he's not invincible. His ERA on the Mets is 1.8. But when he allowed that run, it was in a tie game, and he earned the loss in that 3-2 loss against Cleveland. He also allowed 3 hits, and I think there's another walk involved in there too. Ryan Helsley. And sports writers are happy with the Mets deadline. But Helsley's been an embarrassment too. He's had a 5.4 ERA on the Mets. And this doesn't count this game where he didn't have a single earned run, yet earned the loss because those are unearned runs. But yet his ERA on the Mets is still 5.4. He, in this game, he came into this in a 4-4 game with a runner on third, just had to get him out, which would happen 70% of the time. And the Mets entered the game in the 8th, an infield single, which I guess was partially on Mauricio. Pitch clock violation, and it serves up a 2-run shot. And it's 7-4. And he's been pitiful. Oh, and then Cedric Mullins. I get that he finally had a good game, but he's been pretty bad too. So what would I do if I'm the Mets? First of all, Stanek gotta go. Stanek has to be DFA'd. Um, I'm actually not too mad at Montas after this game, so we'll see what happens here. But Stanek is converted on 3 saves, and he's blown 5 of them. He also has a dreadful 2-6 record as a pitcher. His ERA is 5.31 right now. And he's been bad for a good chunk of the season. He was 0-3 in April, 3 blown saves, and only 1 converted save, 1 hold, 5.59 ERA after he pitched a clean inning against the Astros on March 28th. I get that his ERA, was pretty good but before his blow up, as it was only .96 and it ticked up to 5.06. To his credit, though, he only had a 1.04 ERA in May, even though these runs were unearned, as if not for an error. And this would have happened. It actually would have been 4 runs, but I digress. That was his only blow up in May, although it was a pretty bad one. He earned a loss. He also earned a win against the Cubs, though. 2 holds, pretty good. He gets his ERA down over time to 3.1. In June, he has a 6.23 ERA, but he has a hold and a win. Win came against the Rockies. And again, when Stanek failed, it was in a blowout loss to the Rays anyway. That got, so that got his ERA up. Also, you had this pitiful outing where he can't get an out and has 2 earned runs against the Washington Nationals. So, down to 3.22, up to 4.03, down to 3.86, up to 4.88, but then again, it slowly starts ticking down to 3.9. July, he only had 2.79 ERA, but he had a loss and a blown save. He converted on 2 saves, had 3 holds. His ERA goes down to 3.82. Didn't pitch so well against the Giants in August. Allowed a run. 5 earned runs and only got 2 outs against the Giants a few days later. I mean, that game was unwinnable, but it was so bad that Luis Torrens had to come in and pitch. Clean outing against the Brewers, only for this, where he goes 2/3 of an inning, earns the loss, blown save, 2 earned runs. I mean, it's dreadful. And in this game against the Nationals, part of the reason why the Mets tailspin happened, Senga got injured, obviously, but, I mean, it's Stanek allows single, has to be pulled, then it's a walk and a single, so, I mean, it was bad. What happened there? I mean, his record speaks for himself. He's 2-6. He only has 3 saves, and he blew 5 save opportunities. 5.31 ERA, 1.55 WHIP. Stanek has to go. The Stanek was not good on the Mets last year when they acquired him, but at least last year when they acquired Stanek, there were a few factors of mitigation. First of all, he pitched poorly in his debut on the Mets, and he only got 1 out while allowing 4 runs against his former team, the Seattle Mariners. But, so he was, pretty bad there. I think his regular season ERA on the Mets was 6.06. He had a win. He had 2 holds. He was, he didn't pitch very well. He struggled a lot, but at least back then you saw something with him. And in the playoffs, he had 2 holds and a win, and a 3.38 ERA. This run came in garbage time, and he didn't pitch well against Dodgers, but then again, no one did in this game, NLCS Game 6, after he again earned a win in NLCS Game 5 despite allowing a solo shot to Mookie Betts. So he wasn't bad in 2024. He was good in the postseason. That's how he got his extension, but that extension is looking like a big mistake. And so is everything the Mets are doing. Mendoza. Let's look at all these games where Mendoza made a stupid decision to cost the Mets a chance at winning a baseball game. Um, yeah. Yeah. I'm not even including games where it really wasn't his fault, but in this game, he punted in a 2-1 game after the 8th. D-backs allowed 2 runs. Mets scored 2 and had the tying run on third, go-ahead run on second. Guess what? You could have walked it off if you just, if you just didn't punt and had Diaz pitch in the top of the 9th. But no, you had to use your low-leverage guy, who probably shouldn't have even been on the team. I don't even know who it was. Davinsky? Carrillo? No, it couldn't have been Carrillo. I think Davinsky. What else can we think of? You had this game where basically the Mets made a ton of dumb decisions in extra innings, including giving Luisangel Acuna the green light on a 3-1 count when all you needed was one ball to end the game in the 11th. Having Torrens play first base, I don't even know what the point of that was. I guess you were pinch hitting for a lot, but then why didn't you pinch hit for Torrens? And why didn't you even play first? That was stupid. You had his awful decision to have Brazoban trying a save opportunity in the 9th against the Dodgers on June 3rd. And I think we all know how that turned out. Although that game is very different if Nimmo that can catch a lazy fly ball. This decision, just giving away the game by having Blackburn pitch in a 4-1 game, I guess his logic was to let Blackburn have a long save like he did on June 8th, But June 8th was a blowout win against the Rockies. And he was still hit hard. Just that didn't matter when the Mets scored 13. This was not that kind of game. And it started a tailspin. And of course, then having Blackburn start in multiple games to fall to 0-3 didn't help anything either. In this game, I don't know why, after Brazoban fails, you turn to Jose Castillo and not one of the higher leverage guys. Granted, I don't even know why Castillo is even on the team. This game, having Zach Pop pitched in any MLB game with how bad he is a surefire dumb decision. This game, again, putting Stanek in a high-level situation is always risky. And Peterson was pitching into the 8th strong. He had one hit. I don't know why. After one hit, you pull him. He went about as well as you think. In this game, I don't know why he put Manaea back in the bottom of the 9th and let him lose. Again, Carrillo is bad. So having him pitch in any game is a bad idea. You had this nice win streak, and after this, this is the famous stop sign at third base. This is the game where you pinch it via a hot Vientos for a cold Brett Beatty. This game, you pull Manaea immediately, let Beto in, and Beto allowed 5 runs. Thankfully, he's not on the team anymore. This game, you're not pinch hitting Marte for Tyrone Taylor, and then McNeil at a single, but he gets thrown out. There's been a lot of stupidity that they've done. They keep giving away games. And at some point, if you keep punting away games, you are going to have to punt away in the season as well. I really just can't see a universe right now where the Mets make the playoffs. And if they don't, this is going to be up there as one of the worst collapses in MLB history. might honestly be the worst when you factor in all the circumstances. The Reds are 61-57. They're not a very hot team, so it's not like, so unless they go on a crazy tear, they might very well be a team that makes the playoffs at like if the Mets collapse, they very well may make it like 85 or 86 wins. So maybe it's that the Mets could have played 500 ball, but they are so bad they fall like 80, 81 wins or even into the 70s, where at that point you absolutely can't make it in anymore. So you have that. That makes it, suck even more. You have the fact that they have a big payroll, so as it was 2021 and 2023 where they missed the playoffs were embarrassing. 2021, of course, had that late season collapse aspect to it as well, which I won't get too much into because this video is already very long. And 2023, the collapse was very early on, but again, you still had that large of a payroll and you couldn't do anything with it. Even though you kind of have to. I mean, payroll's that big, so you kind of have to do something with it, and you couldn't. Really, 2024 was the only year where they weren't considered to be a $330 million laughingstock. So you have the super large payroll. You had them being the best team in baseball at one point, and then you have their resurrection, and to blow it all and lose to the mediocre Reds in a playoff race, that would be super ultra embarrassing from the New York Mets to wind up missing the postseason on that. And yet it's very likely. And one final thing. Pete Alonso's home run in Wild Card Game 3 may very well be one of the worst things to happen to the Mets in franchise history. Why do I say that? Well, before that home run happened, the Mets were, as we know, the Mets were 2 innings away from winning the wild card in Game 2. But the Brewers had a good 8th inning because the Mets and their stupidity allowed Phil Maton to pitch in the bottom of the 8th, where he allows 2 home runs and another single. So 3 runs score. Mets enter this inning with a 3-2 lead. They exit trailing 3-5. So the Brewers have a masterful inning against the Mets here. So the Mets, who were, again, only 2 innings away from winning the wild card round, then and there in a sweep, failed, and were down 2-0. If they lose in the first round, Mendoza, Stearns, they get a lot of criticism for not, because even though in a rebuilding year they took them to the playoffs, there's a lot of reasons as to why in a closely contested battle, you blew a 1-0 series lead in the best of 3, and just let this all happen. So there's going to be a lot of criticism for that. Don't forget the Mets' awkward defensive alignment. Like having Iglesias at third. So, but because of that Alonso home run, now the Mets cruise through the NLDS, have no shot of winning the NLCS, and don't predictably. But now you've given Stearns and Mendoza a huge leash. If that home run doesn't happen, they're probably fired after the collapse of the 2025 season, especially with being one of the worst in MLB history, considering in 2024 all they could muster up was a wild card exit. But because of that home run, now they have a huge leash. I don't think you can fire them in 2025. I think they have until 2026 no matter what. And that's loser stuff from Steve Cohen. But it also means that Alonso's home run was a long-term net negative for the Mets. Don't tell Phillies fans that. Don't tell Brewers fans that. But it was.